Upon arriving in the United States, where was the first place you settled and why?
So my mom was living in San Francisco, but when I first came, she didn't have a place for the both of us. I think she was just like renting a room or something. So I stayed with her sister, and I stayed in Pittsburgh, California for about a year. And then after that, I moved in with my mom, and we were in San Francisco for a couple years, and we moved to Sacramento.
You already stated that your mom's sisters were already here. Was there any other family here?
No, I just knew my mom's family. There's my dad's family. My dad has family out here too, but I've never met any one of them, and it's kind of crazy because um, I don't know anyone else whose last name is Gumban, and nobody I know knows anyone whose last name is Gumban. But I was actually working at Metro PCS a couple years ago in South San Francisco, and this Filipino girl came up to my kiosk to pay her bill, and her last name was Gumban, and it was so weird because I've never met anyone with the same last name, and now I really wish that I pursued it, but at the time I wasn't ready to, I guess, meet my dad's side of the family because I have no idea about them.
When you finally met up with your mom in the United States, where was she staying and how was that?
We were renting a room. It's funny because it's basically like the Philippines all over again. It was a house in Excelsior, and in the front of the house was a family. In the back of the house was a family. On the bottom part of the front of the house there was a family, and in the back of the bottom or the first floor was another family, which was us. And it was all Filipinos, but it was basically like four or five different families all living in one house.
Other than living in Daly City, was Excelsior the only other place you lived in San Francisco?
Yeah, I lived in Excelsior District, or in San Francisco, but it's Excelsior in San Francisco.
Okay, so you grew up there until when? High school, or
Yeah, until high school, then we moved to Sacramento.
how was it? Like being Filipino and coming from the Philippines. How was the transition, like school wise? Like,
I don't remember that too much, but I do remember, I mean, like living in San Francisco and being Filipino wasn't hard because the transition wasn't really hard because there's a lot of Filipinos here anyway, and people grew up with a lot of Filipinos, so we all know about each other's cultures. Like, you know, I grew up with a lot of Samoans and Mexicans and Chinese and stuff, but they grew up with a lot of Filipinos, so it was never an issue. But for me, what was hard is that none of my Filipino friends ever wanted to speak Tagalog, and that's how I lost my knowledge of it. I can understand it and I can speak it a little bit, but I didn't really have anybody to conversate in Tagalog except my mom. So that's the only part that sucks. And I do remember because I had a thick old Filipino accent, I sounded like a fob, and you know, kids are really mean and they tease you about it. So I remember reading my books out loud all the time so I could get rid of my accent.